Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to the Get Rich Education Podcast, show number 8. I am your host, Keith Weinhold. With listeners now in 90 countries, it's the show where I have just been giving it all away. What makes this show different than other investing shows is that most shows' advice provide ideas and information with how to invest your money. Instead, when both your money and other people's money provide a return to you, you can live a life that few others can. How do you make other people's money work for you? Is that legal? Even if it is, would that be ethical? Well, as you'll see on our show, the answer is emphatically yes to both questions. So, if you just want to hear what everyone else is already telling you, then this is the wrong show for you. Before we get into today's show topic, I let you know that I would tell you how to put less than a 20% down payment on a property and still avoid making any direct PMI premium payment. What's PMI? Private mortgage insurance is an annoying expense that homeowners have to pay for, usually hundreds of dollars a month, that protects the lender, the bank, against the borrower, you, from defaulting. Typically, once you have a 20% down payment saved up or you have accumulated 20% equity in a property over time, you're no longer deemed a risk to the bank and no longer have to pay PMI. Well, 20% equity in a property represents an element of risk and opportunity to you, and equity has a rate of return of 0. You realize all those things if you listened to episode number 6. So here's what I did to circumvent this. I bought our home where my wife and I live with a 5% down payment. I'll never make a direct PMI payment, yet I have a great 30-year conventional fixed rate of 3.5%. How did I do this? What I did is I offered to pay our seller the full asking price for the home. And in exchange, I asked the seller to pay all lender allowable buyer closing costs up to $13,000. Now, this appeared very reasonable to the seller because I presented it through our agents as I'm going to go ahead and give the seller their price, but it's going to be my terms. That sounds reasonable and fair. You get your price, I get my terms, we can all agree. Well, one of the costs that I had the seller pay out of that $13,000 concession to me was upfront PMI, not monthly PMI. I had them pay upfront PMI in full to my lender, which cost $7,000. So if you pay upfront PMI, you don't have a monthly PMI payment, and I had the seller make that payment for me. So with the $7,000 in upfront PMI, I still had $6,000 left over to spend toward my other closing costs. It does help to have a strong credit score and use a loan originator with low PMI rates, and that might be a credit union. All right, so what are the benefits to me from doing this? Well, that $7,000 paid in upfront PMI is effectively a mildly inflated purchase price that I'm paying at just 3.5% interest. Well, that's only an extra $31 a month, $7,000 at 3.5% interest over 30 years, and that's tax deductible. Compare that to the $250 a month that I would have paid every month that I owned this home if I were making those monthly PMI payments with that same loan in place. With the 5% down payment that I put on our home, which was about $25,000 for a $500,000 property, now note that 5% appreciation in the $500,000 property, that's $25,000 of annual appreciation. Well, that's a 100% return on my down payment. I only put $25,000 down. 5% appreciation in a $500,000 property is $25,000 of benefit. All right, so the 15% difference The difference between the normal 20% down payment I would have made minus a 5% actual down payment, well, that 15% that I didn't have to sink into this home is $75K. Why use that $75K as a down payment on another apartment building? That building returns 25 to 30% or more per year for the 2 years I've owned it, as this asset class often does to a moderately experienced real estate investor. So basically, the best way to separate equity from a property is to ensure that it never goes in there in the first place. So yes, it's a creative financing strategy inside of a conventionally financed product. So we talk about different types of investing at Get Rich Education, but why does real estate get to be a steady theme here? It's created more multimillionaires and billionaires out of ordinary people than anything else. We teach you about real estate investing where you're not managing the property. That is too much work. I did it myself for 5.5 years. That's a part-time job more than an investment. Try to manage too much property and soon your properties are managing you. That's not the key to a better life. With real estate, you do make other people's money work for you at least 3 ways at the same time. First, you use the bank's money for the mortgage loan that can provide you, the property investor, with a leveraged rate of return. Secondly, you're using the tenant's rent income on a monthly basis, which typically exceeds the property's expenses, so that you have income in your bank account every 30 days that you don't have to work for. That's the only way to buy that property, if the income exceeds the expenses. And then thirdly, you're using other people's money as the government's money because they give you extremely generous tax incentives for providing housing. You provide housing to others, unquestionably creating and maintaining great value for society. But operate with integrity. I provide housing for families that is clean, safe, affordable, and functional. As long as I'm doing clean, safe, affordable, and functional, I can feel good about what I'm directly providing society and feel like I'm deserving of a good financial return. To me, anything less than a 25% annual return on investment that first year of ownership is something that I consider disappointing in a rental property. Now, that's something that sounds almost irresponsible to say if you come from the traditional consumer credit world or the buy and sell stock investor world. My mission here is to make you more successful than me, faster than me. Well, how could I reasonably expect to do that? I've been investing in real estate for more than 12 years, and I've spent thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars traveling to seminars, workshops, field trips, listening to audio programs, subscribing to websites, reading books, and I've just been giving it all away here. I paid the full price for a lot of my mistakes. I paid full price for the lesson. You can listen to me for free and avoid mistakes, limit your opportunity cost, save time, and maximize your investment gains. I'll just simply tell you exactly how I do what I do, and I'll even hook you up with my contacts. You're approaching this from a smart angle. Now that we've set the table a little, you've probably heard me say on the show before that any investing, including real estate investing, starts with you. What do you want out of life? Secondly, it's about the market. Third, it's about the team of real estate professionals that you've chosen. Then and only then do you start searching for the property. Fourthly, the market is more important than the property. So then let's talk about real estate market selection. Keep in mind that perhaps the number one answer to most real estate related questions is it depends. So we're often going to be talking in general terms this week. Real estate has a lot of moving parts, so there are going to be times when you might think, well, I've heard an exception to that guideline. So whether you're interested in real estate that's residential, commercial, industrial, office, retail, mobile home park, or storage units, the old real estate motto, location, 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 still rings true today. As thinking and acting in expansionary terms is a central theme at Get Rich Education, well then let me ask you something, all right? How would you like it if I said the next investment property that you buy has to be within the same block that you live in? That's it. You must buy your next property in the block where you live now. Well, you probably wouldn't like that very much, would you? You would find that limiting. How would you get a good deal? it's not very likely that you're going to find the property type that's most desirable or profitable. You might even have to wait a while for anything to come up for sale on your block. What if we open that up to a 6 square block area? Probably still pretty limiting on what you would have to choose from. What if we open that up and say you must buy a property only on the southwest side of the town that you're living in? There we're opening it up some more, and maybe you could find a suitable one now. It's still pretty limiting. Why limit yourself? Open it up to the entire town or city and its surrounding suburbs. Now we've increased the chances of you finding a suitable property. What if we opened it up to your entire state or province that you live in? What if it's open to an entire group of states in your part of the country, including places that are now a full day's drive from your home? What about the entire nation? What about the whole world? Well, when we begin talking about property a full day's drive or more from your home, you aren't going to be able to effectively manage them. How would you show a vacant apartment to prospective tenants? How would you replace a leaky faucet? Well, we've talked about it before. Management isn't your best and highest use anyway. When I mentor new investors that are going to buy locally, I tell them it's not mandatory, but where possible, manage your own properties for 1 to 2 years so that you understand management from the inside. It will help you throughout your investment career. But depending on where you live, you might have to invest outside of the area that you reside in order to generate a sufficient rate of return. That's why both the market and the team of professionals you choose, including that key reputable property manager, those things are more important than the bricks and mortar of the property itself. Generally, a property's monthly rent needs to be at least 1% of the property's purchase price in order to have a monthly income that exceeds the monthly expenses, which is called positive cash flow. All right, so for example, a $200,000 property needs to have a monthly rent income of $2,000 or more. There's that 1% rent to value ratio, $2,000 a month being 1% of a $200,000 property. That's the rent to value ratio, or RV ratio, to get passive cash flow after your 20% down payment at purchase. If a property's monthly rent income does not exceed all the monthly expenses, don't buy the property. I can't emphasize that enough. If a property's monthly rent income does not exceed all the monthly property expenses, then don't buy the property. But you can't find properties that generate those kind of returns in every region of the U.S. If you're interested in buying investment property, it's not merely about finding cheap houses. What good is a cheap house if the market's no good? In Detroit or Flint, Michigan, a $500 house is no good if no one wants to live there and no one has a job to pay the rent and you still have a property tax bill and other ongoing operational expenses. In Dallas-Fort Worth, you can buy a pretty looking, newer built brick rental home in a great suburban neighborhood for $125,000 in an area where the population and jobs are growing. The market dictates the kind of rental property you can or should buy to get something profitable. Just because a house is pretty or that you would want to live there yourself, that's not a reason for buying a property either. That's an awful reason alone for buying an investment property that will generate an adequate rate of return for you. You want to buy a property where the monthly rent income exceeds all the monthly expenses and the overall value of the home has a reasonable chance to appreciate every year. These things are dictated by the market that you're investing in, and typically that means geographically. Though technology is eroding those geographic differences, geography is still extremely important and will continue to be for a long time. Now, in the future, I'm going to have some investment property providers and property managers appear on the show here that represent markets where real estate investors have received some good returns, including markets that I've invested in myself. You can do your own research, too, on what you think might be a good market for you to invest in. Check citydata.com. It's city-data.com. It shows you everything from crime rates to weather patterns to municipal drinking water quality. There's average commute time to work, demographic data, all sorts of things. See if the population is going up or down in a major metro that you might be interested in. Check both the inner city statistics and the MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area, as urban areas populations are so sprawled out in the U.S. Go to the Chamber of Commerce website and see what the stories are in that market. The Chamber often is going to paint an overly optimistic picture. Click into the business pages of that city's newspaper or skim some blog content for stories. Look closely at job growth. What are the economic drivers that create and sustain jobs there? And are those jobs sustainable, or is it a job sector that can be easily outsourced and automated to another country in the future? I don't only want to know what's going on in a market today, I want to know what I can reasonably expect to happen in a market tomorrow. Sixplex could be full of employed tenants today, but those tenants are going to move out someday. So I want to know that when the tenant vacates, I'll have a reasonable expectation that the next tenant that moves in is going to want to live in this market and will have a job and an income to support my future rent income. Are there major companies, major employers, different areas of development, and different industries that exist in a city? You don't just want a strong economic base, you want a broad economic base. You don't just want a one- or two-legged economic stool. If you invest in a little town of 5,000 people that's dependent on a local gypsum mine, or even if gypsum mining is strong now, if the gypsum mine dries up or the price of that commodity goes down or environmental regulations shut it down, for some reason it's no longer economically feasible to extract it, well, then there's a lot more risk there than there is in a larger market, a larger one that's going to be more economically diversified. A large metro market might have tens of thousands of companies and numerous Fortune 500 companies, not just present there, but headquartered there. That market could have vibrant sectors in services, finance, manufacturing, construction, hospitality and leisure, health services, transportation, utilities. See, this is why in general I prefer larger markets to smaller markets. It's also important to me that I invest in an area that is growing. A growing population is an important part of an economic infrastructure. A growing population with job creation among diverse industries is what gives real estate value. Real estate has a significant supply-demand component. That part is just economics 101. On the demand side, a growing population boosts the need for goods and services, especially housing units, which in turn leads to more economic growth and higher profitability. On the supply side, loads of developable land keeps housing prices from rising too far too fast where you have a ton of developable land. Think Texas, where property prices are low. That's because supply can keep up with demand. On the other hand, a limited supply of developable land can make demand exceed supply in a prosperous place. Think about Manhattan Island. Think about San Francisco. Those places are hemmed in by water. They have rent control. Their high housing demand and low supply leads to housing prices that are so high that they don't even make any sense to buy and rent to others. The RV ratio doesn't work. The rent income doesn't keep up proportionately to the high purchase price. Those markets are on the coasts. The Atlantic and Pacific coast generally have RV ratios that don't make sense as landlords. There are a few reasons for that. Homeowners want to live close to water and they drive up prices beyond what makes sense in a factual form. Feelings trump facts in one's home, and in ROI-driven investments that we're talking about, these are based on facts, not feelings. Another reason coastal markets make less sense for investors is that institutional money, like hedge fund money, is often invested in major coastal markets, driving up prices there and putting those rent-to-value ratios, RV ratios, out of reach for what makes sense for everyday investors. Foreign buyers also tend to buy in pricier U.S. coastal markets more so than they do in inland markets. Foreign buyers often can't get loans, and when foreign buyers can't get loans, they must pay in all cash. And when they pay in all cash, they don't need a bank appraisal, and bank appraisals typically put ceilings on prices. Well, that ceiling is removed when those foreign buyers are paying all cash. So that's another reason that people overbid and heat up coastal markets. A rising tide lifts all boats in a market, but it doesn't lift up the rent amount enough to justify the higher purchase prices for investors like us in those coastal markets. Typically, states and areas with more affordable housing tend to be those that are profitable for real estate investing. They have more favorable RV ratios, like we mentioned earlier. Where are those places in particular? We're talking about places like Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Indiana, Ohio, just to start naming a few states with areas with those favorable RV ratios. What types of industries can make for a good real estate market? For starters, energy markets are really great, natural resource markets, or transportation hub markets. So what makes those so great? It's because those jobs are the types that are tied to the land and they cannot be easily outsourced or automated. Your tenants have those jobs, and as investors, we want them to stay tied there so they can keep paying us rent. An oil field worker has to extract oil off the wellheads where that oil reserve is. They can't live in Taiwan. They need to live in Minot, North Dakota, or Odessa, Texas, or wherever the oil is. Memphis, Tennessee has long been the number one major metro market known for providing the best cash flow to real estate investors. Why there? Because it's a transportation hub. FedEx's hub is at Memphis International Airport. The cargo moves through there. Memphis has the highest volume cargo airport in the U.S., second in the world. Well, those jobs are geography specific. Those jobs cannot be easily outsourced or automated, if they can at all. Even though Memphis is inland, it's on the Mississippi River, so Memphis is a non-coastal water transportation hub. It only costs 1/12 as much to move goods over water than it does over land. We keep our eye on technology at Get Rich Education, and 3D printing promises to disrupt the way goods are shipped, but you will still need to ship the big stuff and the valuable stuff through Memphis anyway. Memphis also has a vibrant healthcare sector, and that promises to continue increasing in importance in jobs, so you need to take a lot of things into consideration and make decisions based on what you think. When I first looked into a place like Memphis as an investor market and learned that you could buy single-family homes with a decent tenant in them for $60,000, I thought, how can that be? What are they made of? Legos? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, seriously, $60K isn't even a down payment in my home market of Anchorage, Alaska, but Memphis represents a good opportunity. It's not merely because the homes are inexpensive, it's that in Memphis, the homes happen to be inexpensive in a market with sustainable jobs and good RV ratios. Leaving Memphis and just talking generally, what about the landlord and tenant law in the state or city that you're investing in? That can have all kinds of ramifications. If your tenant gets behind on payments, you want your manager to be able to file for eviction and have your non-paying tenant out in weeks, not months, or else you're sustaining zero rent income as the property owner. Now, since your team of professionals is more important than the property, you want to pick a manager that screens tenants well so that you don't have to deal with this. We're going to have some good property managers on the show, and you can find out how to contact them. What about the school district that your rental property is in? Your kids aren't going to school in an out-of-state market that you choose to invest in, but if you buy in a good school district to attract tenants, then they're going to want to put their children in that school district, so that's a good thing for you. You can already see the advantages of having some local market intelligence and not doing everything on your own. There's advantages to your home market, however, right where you live. You do have things like in-state financing and networking with others to find local deals that are not publicly available. So I don't completely discount investing locally, but even so, it's good to be in multiple markets for diversification. Now, most any of the topics I just hit above are worthy show topics in themselves. This is just an overview. So if you're new to real estate investing, this is what I'm talking about with not hurrying. Rather, educate yourself on investing first. Knowledge decreases risk. Decreased risk decreases fear and increases confidence and competence and leads to intelligent action and is more likely to result in winning investing and ultimately a better life for you. So study the real estate market of interest to you a little bit and get some context there before you go there. We'll get those types of people here on the show for you later on. Shoot, sometimes these people will even pick you up from the airport when you go visit their market. So how do I look at a market through my own eyes, and what do I get from showing up there in person other than an interesting experience? Well, I get to tell you about it for one thing. I did a property tour of Philadelphia 3 months ago. Why Philly? Well, the inner city population is growing as Americans are embracing urban living again. There is a lot of diversified economic activity there. That's a big market. And the RV ratios on properties seemed to make sense to me. So the typical offering there in Philadelphia had a monthly rent income of $900 and a purchase price of $70,000. $900 is more than 1% of $70,000, so there's my 1% minimum rent to value ratio that makes me want to look into it further. So the CEO of a Philadelphia turnkey investment company gave me a tour of their investment properties. He just gave me a ride around in his car. His voice was nearly hoarse because he spent the day before cheering at the Philadelphia Eagles game. So first we met his staff at their office, and then we drove around urban avenues, and he explained that their company buys bank foreclosed properties and properties in need of rehab at deep discounts. And once their rehab team is done, they put a tenant in the property, and then they sell that property to investors like me and you. That method is called turnkey real estate investing, so that the rehab and tenanting is already done for the investor before they buy. It's one way that I really like to buy. That way, when I buy the property, it's already fully rehabbed. It often has a new kitchen, a new bathroom. Sometimes it includes new plumbing and electrical. And it already has a tenant in it, so I'm getting rent from day one, and it probably won't need many repairs or maintenance for a while either, since it's just been rehabbed. So when we drove around Philly and he got to show me the properties, I learned that the typical property is a 3-bed, 1-bath, 1,400 square foot row house with no garage in West Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia. A row house is a home attached to adjacent homes. These were made of brick, built 60 to 80 years ago. Well, that submarket is willing to accept the fact that there is just one bathroom in the home and that there isn't any garage there. This is inner city. Some of the tenants don't even own cars. Many of these homes were in gritty inner city neighborhoods. They were graffiti-free and they weren't blighted, but they were simple and older. Public transportation proximity was a key factor in that market. How close was the property to commuter bus lines? How close was it to the trolley line, to elevated trains? The public transportation infrastructure is an amenity and has value to tenants in that market. The turnkey provider pointed out to me that their company likes to deal with properties about 1.5 blocks from the public transportation lines, far enough away so the area is quiet, close enough for tenant convenience. I mean, that's something I wouldn't have thought about if I were just out there looking on my own. Something I pointed out to the provider that he said he wasn't thinking about is that my eye was on the pedestrian traffic. And I'm not just looking at what people are wearing. Are pedestrians on the urban Philadelphia sidewalks in these neighborhoods moving along gainfully as they walk? Are they walking with a sense of purpose, like they need to get somewhere? If so, they're more likely to be productive, employed, and capable of paying rent. One neighborhood over from where I see that, I see pedestrians that are shuffling around, loitering on the corner, drinking something out of a brown paper bag. I mean, what kind of tenant am I going to be able to attract to a home that I would buy in that lesser neighborhood? Probably not one that's going to responsibly pay the rent every month. But if I buy property too close, like 10 blocks or less, from the bustling inner city universities at the University of Pennsylvania and Drexel University, the properties are nicely prettied up, but prices rise disproportionately high in relation to the rent income, which lags behind. I might find a property with a $2,000 rent income there, but it's going to cost me $400K. Well, that's an RV ratio of 0.5%, and those numbers just don't work for an investor that wants positive cash flow every month. So major metros have a sweet spot. If you buy an expensive property, the rent income does not rise proportionately to meet the higher purchase price. But if you buy a very low-end property in a war zone, Even if the RV ratio exceeds 1%, you often run into a whole host of problems, safety of tenants and neighbors, and your manager actually getting your rent collected. So find something in the middle. Even if you learn that a metro is profitable for real estate investors, you still can't just go out there and throw a dart at a map and think that you've got a winner. We found that out in this Philadelphia turnkey real estate company that won't buy properties just over the city line in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, for example, because the property taxes in that jurisdiction are prohibitively high for investors. So, all right, think about what you have the ability to do here. When you buy a turnkey property, you're helping neighborhoods get a facelift, sort of healing America one home at a time. You're providing a rehabbed home to a family. You basically helped provide jobs for the contractors that worked to rehab that home, from pipe fitters to drywall texturers and window installers to a janitorial service company. Now, it's not completely altruistic. Buy educated, buy right, and you can be a profiteer. I didn't buy in Philadelphia. Few markets check every box. My concern was that their local landlord and tenant law meant that a tenant can fall 3 months behind in rent or more before they can be evicted. Well, if the tenant doesn't pay the rent for 3 months, I don't want to be the owner of that property. Philadelphia might be right for you and you might do great there. It's just that I've experienced bustling markets with similar RV ratios where I can get an eviction in weeks, not months. And I usually don't need to get an eviction at all because I choose a good property manager. So it's not about what you think is a nice property or a nice place to live either when it comes to investing. For example, the Philadelphia submarket accepts living in an 80-year-old home with 1 bathroom. Yeah, that's a housing stock that exists in West Philadelphia, and the market and employment fundamentals are there to secure the income stream. Now, for something totally on the other end of the spectrum, last year my wife and I toured property in the Philippines. I kind of did it more out of general interest than I thought that I would really buy anything, just on a little diversion from our vacation there. The tenants in those units are gainfully employed and they pay the rent in brand new construction homes that are newly built without any hot water and no washer dryer. Well, within that region and culture, that's normal region-wide. Whether we were in rural Tarlac province or in urban Metro Manila, Filipino tenants typically don't have hot water or washers and dryers. They hand wash their clothing in basins and hang it on a clothesline. I guess that could be a good investment from an investor standpoint. It's not about how you live, it's about providing housing for your tenants. If that were in the US, I don't think I would consider it functional, and no respectable tenant would really accept that here. My wife speaks the local language, and so did the Filipino real estate agent, but the agent's English was rough, and I was definitely the only one there that understood the language of investing. We got nowhere. I couldn't even calculate an RV ratio, let alone figure out if the property might produce positive cash flow. Now, I've got to admit, I could have bought in Philadelphia, but I was completely out of my element in considering buying any rental property in the Philippines. Besides the cultural divide, I had no understanding of the laws over there. I had no vetted team there. I had no reliable way to leverage a good property manager that had that street-level knowledge. Even here in the U.S., 95% of real estate agents cater to selling homes to owner-occupied families, not investors. Most agents here might as well be speaking another language if they don't speak investing. So as you can see, hooking up with a reputable, on-the-ground investment property provider and a property manager in a market is essential. Though it's possible, it would be difficult for you to gain a lot of this knowledge yourself. Well, how do you get into the right relationship? The relationship where you buy a property where the monthly rent income exceeds all the expenses, which is the only way to buy. That's investing. Buying and hoping that the rent income will exceed the property expenses someday, well, that's mere speculating. Why speculate when you can invest? Invest well. Bad investing comes from a lack of education and a lack of strategy. And unfortunately, a lack of being connected to the right people. Well, how are you going to find someone with that submarket knowledge? How would you possibly hope to find it in a market that has vibrant, diverse business sectors, a gainfully employed tenant base, RV ratios that make sense, a landlord-tenant law that tilts to the investor's favor, and a reputable property manager all under one roof? Well, for the next show, I went straight to the metro area that checks all these boxes and is also arguably the most profitable investor market in the United States over the last decade. I've been familiar with a provider there for years. So yes, you're going to hear directly from the owner of a prominent, reputable turnkey provider who also manages properties for you in that market on the next show. I'm going to bring him on. So this will be where the rubber meets the road, and you will learn all about both his market and his company. And when it comes to investing there, I'm going to get all the best answers for you directly from him. I can't wait to share that with you. Until then, go out and don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to the Get Rich Education podcast, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.